The Wolf Among Us is easily one of my favorite games of all time. From the really amazing art style, to the really intriguing story, to the characters, to the universe and world of it, I love everything about it. I just adore this game. It is easily up there with one of Telltale's best games, along with The Walking Dead Season 1 and Tales from the Borderlands, and it is criminally underrated in comparison to both of those. This was still in like Telltale's early days when they were making really good stories and really good games before they slowly kind of were forced to push out game after game, slowly degrading in quality before they went bankrupt and died and then suddenly got revived. But we'll get to that. If you know literally nothing about The Wolf Among Us, essentially it's a murder mystery detective game set in a world where the Fable characters from those like old Fable stories exist in the real world and had to flee the homelands to come to New York City because it was safer for them. And they now have to try to blend in with this environment and learn to live amongst regular people. They do this using this potion called Glamour that essentially makes them look like humans. And they have to try to blend in and find a way to keep themselves all cool and collected and solve all their problems internally because they can't have people discover that they're not just normal humans. And you play as Sheriff Bigby Wolf, otherwise known as the Big Bad Wolf. And that may sound like a really weird premise. Like essentially, when they moved to New York City, they got a complete restart, forget the past, kind of just start their lives over, and Bigby decided that he wanted to become the sheriff and try to be good and not do all the bad things that he did, like eating pigs and such, and blowing houses down. Or, you know, that whole grandma dressing up thing. It sounds like a super weird concept, but it actually works really well and lends itself to some really cool writing. And it's really dark. Like, this is just as dark as probably like the original Fable writings, where it's some really crazy stuff happens and it's not afraid to be super mature. And even though it seems like it might be silly or more lighthearted with these fantasy characters, it is very gritty and very hard-hitting. So if you've never played The Wolf Among Us, I recommend you just buy it right now and play it. It is totally worth your time. All 5 episodes are not very expensive anymore, since that was one of Telltale's really early games. It is totally worth spending the money on, especially if you get it on sale or anything. It's a great game, and I highly recommend you try it out if you're at all interested by that concept or any of the visuals. Something a lot of people like to say about Telltale games is that the choices don't actually really matter that much. They're kind of more surface level, and that most of the time it's kind of like very basic differences that don't actually make a humongous difference on the overall game, which I think is definitely true for a lot of Telltale's later games, but I think for their early games, they did a much better job of having actual substantial differences with the choices you make. And I kind of wanted to test that theory with The Wolf Among Us. I've played through the game quite a few times because I played it through once myself, I played it through with my sister, having her make all the choices, and just very recently I played through it with my mom and had her make all the decisions, and they both loved the game too. But a lot of them chose the same things or very similar things to what I had chose, so I've never really gotten to see a lot of the branching paths that the game has, or to see if there are substantial changes depending on the choices you make. So after completing that recent playthrough and kind of getting back into my love of the game, I decided to dedicate myself to play through the game 3 times. Because there are sections where there's like 3 different choices you can make on, like, say, an area to go to first, and that will make a difference. And so basically 3 playthroughs was about as much as I could handle while still getting as many choices in as possible. I broke these playthroughs up into basically good Bigby, bad Bigby, and I don't want to talk to anybody and I'm going to be silent Bigby. Because something Telltale always has in their dialogue is that silence is a valid option, and they always have like that 3 dots option where you just don't say anything. And I'm really curious to see what it would be like if I just played through the entire game without saying anything. So we're going to see how it changes when I pick all the good dialogue options, where I'm trying to be really nice to everybody and be a really changed Bigby. And we're going to see how it changes when I'm really mean and say a bunch of jerky things the whole time or start punching people. And then we're going to see what it's like when I'm silent and just making everyone feel extremely uncomfortable. And with all the big choices, I'm going to try to go down every single big choice per playthrough in a different way to hopefully see what the biggest differences are and if that actually is substantial and makes a huge impact on the overall story. So we're going to get really in depth. We're going to figure out every single direction the story can go into, pick out all the little details. This is going to take a while. So pack in, but it's going to be interesting. All right, cool. Okay, so first, really quick, I'm going to explain how I'm structuring this video. Essentially, I'm going to go through episode by episode talking about all the major choices and all the major differences between those choices first. And like all the different choices that I made throughout those 3 playthroughs and just kind of go on an episode by episode basis. Then in the second half, I will talk about each playthrough on its own and how that differed, because there are a lot of more minor choices like dialogue and stuff that I made throughout each playthrough that ended up having like a major impact on other dialogue while not having necessarily a major impact on a full story. And so I'll talk about each playthrough on its own and how different those were just because of how I acted during the playthrough. And then we'll end on talking about sequel news, and I want to bring up something kind of really cool that I did in October leading up to this video. Alright, so let's get into it. So starting off with episode 1, something kind of cool that the whole series does really well is that it even kind of has a little bit of choices during the combat. Like the game starts off with you checking on an apartment where there was a bunch of yelling and things getting knocked over, and you're kind of going in there to see what's going on, and you immediately get into a fight with the woodsman. And the game like gives you several choices when it comes to the fighting to be like, hey, like, where do you want to throw him? What do you want to use in combat? And this is continued out throughout the whole game, and it's pretty cool. Like, it's kind of like adds a little bit more than just quick time events, and the difference being, did you complete the quick time event or did you fail it and get hit kind of thing? Like, you also get to be like, I'm going to use this, or I'm going to hit him with that. With the first one, it kind of like ends up eventually putting you through all the options, but then later on in the series, it'll be like one thing or the other, and you only get to see one. So it was kind of cool on my second, third playthrough, picking a different one and getting to see different combat animations, even if they're just minute differences and not necessarily super crazy or anything. I have to point out a flaw, though, that I immediately noticed in the first episode. So there's some kind of disconnect, especially during the very beginning, between dialogue choices and what the game expects. Like, there's this whole thing where there's this really cool line you can say to the woodsman, which is like, if you can't be nice, you will have to wait outside. Which, alright, cool line. Alright, Bigby, you're cool. And if later on you end up trying to throw the woodsman out of the apartment, he kind of re-brings up that line, and it's like, I told you you'd have to wait outside. But if you didn't pick that dialogue, then it's like, but you didn't tell him that he would have to wait outside.
I'll fucking put you on the ground. Shut up. And River, that's who the fuck I am, you stupid bitch. Hey, what did I say? I said be nice, or you wait outside. Come on.
You could kind of excuse it, but I'm like, they really kind of were banking on you picking that dialogue option and then that follow-up. Like, if you mix and match them a little, that it's like kind of a disconnect there. Luckily, this doesn't happen often at all in the game. Like, this is the main one that just kind of immediately is like, right at the very beginning of the game, there's like this disconnect if you pick the wrong options. From there, you end up going out the window. Faith ends up helping you out a lot, so you don't have to go into your evolved form. You learn that fables are actually really hard to kill and are unnaturally strong. You have a conversation with Faith where you have the choice to kind of, first off, you can use like this match kit that you found earlier, if whether or not you found it or not, it gives you that option. Or you can just light her cigarette, or you can choose not to for some reason. And you have the choice to help her out with some money, because she was supposed to get paid for the work that she did with the woodsman, but he never paid her. which doesn't really make a difference other than the fact that if you do give her the money, Bigby won't have the money later, but it'll make you feel good in the moment. So, I mean, this leads into the intro, which is honestly so good. It's ridiculous. The visual style is so cool and it's done so well, and the intro music, I literally have like a long version of it on repeat that I would listen to when I first played it because it is so good. I love the music of this game, and it is completely exemplified in the intro. Like everything I love about the music and everything I love about the visual style, it is just, you can't skip the intro. This is that Netflix intro where you don't click skip intro because it's that good that you want to watch it every single time. Certified bop. You find Beauty being really shady and trying to leave without her husband knowing, and she asks you not to tell her husband, to which you're kind of like, yeah, okay. Or you're like, nah, that's not cool, bro. I'm not gonna do that. Beast ends up catching you as you're like going into the elevator, and you can choose whether or not to tell him. Basically, if you tell him the truth, he ends up like thanking you and being like, alright, cool, thanks, and like liking you and going off to find Beauty. Otherwise, he's just like, okay. And there'll be some negative consequences later on for that. Bigby returns to his apartment. We get to see that he has a very trashy lifestyle where he's kind of a mess and just has like beer and nothing else, and lives with Colin the pig, who is not glamored at all and just kind of hiding out in there for free. And we get some backstory about how Bigby is obviously the big bad wolf, and even though that they were supposed to kind of have new lives here and get a fresh start, people are still scared of him, and he still is like trying his best to become a better person. And you can choose whether or not to give Colin your drink. He either will be like sick, or he'll be like, I'm upset. I also really like this dialogue. It's really funny.
I know you like this whole lone wolf thing you got going for yourself, but I've seen the way you look at Snow, okay? You're not fooling me.
Will you shut up?
Well, maybe if my throat wasn't so parched, I wouldn't have to keep talking.
Wait, that doesn't make sense.
Just give me a drink, please.
It's just a great example of the really good writing this whole series has. From here, Snow White suddenly knocks on your door, and with exciting news, Faith has been murdered and her head was left on your doorstep. From here, you kind of have the option to investigate more or to just stay with what you know, and it will have a little bit of an impact, because even though it doesn't have like major game-changing impact of whether or not you find all the evidence or you just basically find the basic evidence you have to find, it will like change what Bigby knows and draw more conclusions later in the game, which is a cool detail, and it kind of rewards you for taking the extra time to look at every single detail in the environment. Crane is a jerk and tells you to figure out who the murderer is. You end up looking through some books to find out what Faith's fairy tale was and what she originally was like in the homelands, and kind of figure out who she was and mark her as deceased. You use the magic mirror to find where the husband is so you can go talk to him because he's a lead, and then you get a call from Toad saying that someone's at the apartment buildings who is extremely suspicious. This is where the first major choice comes in. You have to choose whether or not to go to Toad's apartment first or to Lawrence's apartment, because going to one means you're going to be late to the other, and so you have to kind of decide which one you think going to be more important. Essentially, if you go to Toad's apartment first, you get a small glimpse of a person that's in the apartment, and you kind of chase him out, but you don't manage to catch him and everything. And then you end up talking to Toad, and it's pretty much the same path there. It's not that much different on Toad's side. Like, I honestly, it's just a better pick to go to Lawrence's apartment first, because with Toad's, it makes almost zero difference to go there first. You're still going to get Toad upset at you, and go through that whole scene of trying to get him to talk about what they said to him and what happened. Well, if you go to Lawrence's apartment first, you catch him still alive, but if you go to it second, he ends up being dead by the time you get there and won't be there for the rest of the series. So on Toad's side, you end up having to basically talk to him and investigate the apartment and try to call him out on all his lies because he's trying to hide the fact that he did have someone come into his apartment and beat the crap out of him. And that's a pretty fun like little mini game where you get to kind of be like put all the pieces together and call him out and remember what he said. It's not super hard or anything, but it is kind of like fun to be like, all right, Toad, you just said this, so you're a liar. But one of the other options you actually do have is you can kind of just straight up beat the crap out of Toad. Like if you don't want to bother investigating, but you know he's lying to you, you're like, you know what? And you just basically scare it out of him, which will kind of end tragically with TJ getting to see that. And Snow White won't be very happy with you at the end. While if you actually just investigate and call him out on his lies and get it out of him that way, Snow will compliment you on how smoothly it goes. With Lawrence, depending on if you went there first or last, it's going to be the same at first, but essentially you're either investigating an actual death or you're investigating what you think is a death, and then surprise, he's actually still alive and you're able to talk to him about what happened. Okay, so I kind of lied about him being completely dead, but he's basically dead. He's like on the verge. He's right there. He dies like immediately. There's kind of some sweet dialogue that changes and a lot of like little differences depending on whether or not he's actually alive or dead. Both kind of heart touching. Either there's like kind of a nice moment with Bigby and Snow if he's dead, or there's kind of like a sad moment where you have to tell him that his wife is dead. The other major difference, depending on if you went there first or second, is if you went there first, there will be a knocking on the door, and it's one of the Tweedle brothers. So if he is alive, you tell him to play dead, and you guys hide in the closet, and he comes in, and you can basically choose whenever to jump out. You're basically trying to catch him and see what he's doing there and why he broke into the house. Which is where another choice comes in, because depending on how early you jump out, Lawrence can actually end up dying again. So essentially your choice is to either jump out early before he is able to really incriminate himself but save Lawrence, or let Lawrence shoot himself and he'll end up dead in the rest of the series, just like if you'd went there second. If you had gone there second, essentially the Tweedle brother will be waiting and hiding in the closet because he had already gotten there before you guys had, and it'll lead to the same thing as you jumping out of the closet, which is just that you end up chasing him down. In a really cool scene. You get him to talk about the fact that the woodsman is apparently at the Trip Trap, and then Bigby gets knocked out by the other Tweedle brother. So when you wake up, you and Snow decide that you're going to go to the Trip Trap, and you guys have like a pretty good conversation in the car. And I think this is a good time to bring up one of my favorite things that Telltale does that is actually really good. I call it the "We'll Remember That" system. Essentially, certain lines of dialogue that you pick during key moments can end up making a little pop-up in the top left that says, "This character appreciated that," or "This character will remember that." This is a very small detail, but by just having that there makes such a difference. And sometimes it's a fake effect. Like, it's not always something where if it says they will remember that, it doesn't mean necessarily that it is going to come into play later in the game, but it does mean that it could. Because there's about a 50-50 chance of it actually doing that, but then Telltale actually will catch you off guard sometimes, and they will bring up these things that you said before, and you'll be like, oh, they did remember that, and it'll be cool, and they'll bring it back up. So even in these scenarios where they don't actually ever bring it back, just seeing that has an impact. You'll be like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or okay, cool, like I'm glad I said that. Like that made her feel better. This person appreciated that. It adds so much more depth to even the dialogue choices because they can have an impact, and even if they don't always end up using it, I feel like Telltale kind of set this up with, hey, we will set it so that this is data, this dialogue choice is taken and remembered, and if we use it in a later episode and we find a good place to bring it back up, then we will. Like, that's how it feels to me, at least, and that doesn't always happen, so you will get these ones where it's just kind of a fake effect and it has no real impact because they never bring it up again, but then they will have these moments where it does, and it's really cool. So that means because of that, you never know which one is going to actually be brought back and which one isn't. So every single time it does pop up, it does have an impact. You're like, crap, I am actually affecting the way this character sees me. I am actually like saying things that aren't just they're going to forget in the next episode. It's a really good system and kind of it manages to make more choices while still not having to have humongous branches. So you go to the Trip Trap and you have an extremely difficult time trying to get anybody to talk about if the woodsman is there or if they've seen him. And then it turns out he was just in the bathroom. Gren kind of gets pissed off because something you kind of learn about in this scene is that the three of them are all kind of seen as the lower end poor people of the woodland creatures. Essentially, there's this apartment complex called the Woodlands, and all of them get the humongous priority. It costs a lot to live there, and so all of their issues that they send to the office are usually front of the line, and while everyone else gets pushed to the back and gets solved months and months later, and they kind of just aren't treated as fairly. Not that that's really Bigby's fault, but that is an issue and they aren't very happy about it. So then when you come in and start making accusations at his friend the woodsman, he gets kind of mad. So then we get this really cool scene which kind of reveals Bigby's next form, where he gets hairier and more rugged, and he gets a full beard and bushy eyebrows and like claws, and it's really cool looking, and he gets yellow eyes. And then you kick his ass. You then get the choice on whether or not you rip his arm off or don't. Basically, if you rip his arm off, that's going to go towards your reputation. He's not going to have an arm for the rest of the series, and everyone's going to kind of bring that up and kind of be more terrified of you. While if you show mercy and don't do that, then it kind of moves you more towards the direction of you're trying to change and be better. You can also pay for the drink that you get afterwards if you didn't spend all your money on Faith. So one of the Tweedle brothers ends up coming in, and the woodsman takes this as an opportunity to run away while the Tweedle brother is running away, so then you have to choose who you go after. Essentially, you'll capture whoever you go after, and they'll be used in the next episode, and the other one gets away. And then we end on a really, really nice little cliffhanger where you have this dramatic build-up scene where you're like, oh no, what happened? And then it's Snow White's head. She lost her head. She's dead. And her head was left in the exact same way that Faith was. And that's episode 1. That was a fun time. What a good time. Okay, so moving into episode 2, I have to admit something. Episodes 2 and 4 are kind of, at least in my opinion, mediocre. It's not that there isn't really good things in them, and when you're playing through the whole 5 episodes as a whole game, it's great throughout. But when you're looking at this at an episode by episode basis, episodes 2 and 4 just are kind of lower than 1 and 3 and 5. Like, it feels like the overall plot progression is way less. There's less climactic moments. There's less really interesting things. Like, there's still good stuff and good story progression, but it feels like a stepping stone to get to the next major thing in the next episode. Like, nothing that happens in episodes 2 or 4 feels humongously major. It feels like setup for the major thing that will then happen in the next episode. So again, like, cool stuff. I even think, like, something I want to point out is that the intro is really cool. I love this scene where we get to see the red and blue police lights flashing on Bigby's horrified face, and it transitions amazingly into this interrogation, which is a cool scene, and we get to see some use of more magic and this spell that wipes people's memories and how they've managed to stay hidden for so long. And so, like, there are cool stuff again, but it's just like, in the grand scheme, this is a lot of setup for episode 3. So on playthrough number 3, I'm not gonna lie, whenever I got to episode 2 or 4, I was like, here we go, just gotta get through this one. Essentially, Crane uses a memory wipe spell to get you out of there and get back to figuring out what's going on, and then depending on if you chose the woodsman or Tweedle, you get to go back and interrogate them. Something a little bit disappointing with the interrogation scene is that there apparently is a way to, like, fail to interrogate them, but it's gotta be really hard because I tried both options in multiple playthroughs of being really nice to him. And that'll make Bluebeard really upset and he'll be like, ah. Or if you are like actually being really brutal and getting your information by kind of this screwing with him a ton, then Bluebeard will be on your side, but Crane will be upset. But either way, being really brutal and terrible to them or being really nice to them will work and you'll get information out of them either way. It does make a difference because the way that that character looks at you for the rest of the series will be very different, and some of the brutal torture will get brought back up. But other than that, you can pretty much easily get the information out of them. I didn't even figure out how you could not. If you interrogate the Tweedle, he essentially just kind of brings up the fact that his employer really wanted him to look into it, that he was basically hired to go and try to talk to anybody involved with the murder. Something cool if you interrogate the woodsman is that you can learn about the fact that he was sleeping with Holly's sister, and kind of just because Holly's sister is a prostitute and behind their backs, even though Holly is one of his friends, that he was sleeping with her. This is something that you'll learn later in the game normally, but you can know that information ahead of time and the dialogue's slightly different, which is kind of cool. And then, whoa, it turns out Snow White is actually alive. And then we get the cool intro again. So basically the assumption is that the body was actually glamored to look like Snow White, and that it wasn't actually Snow White. There's an important bit of dialogue that Bigby and Snow have in the elevator where you can essentially say, I'm glad you're not dead. And if you do pick that option, it comes back later and it's kind of really cool. I'm not gonna lie. So both TJ and Mr. Toad come in because apparently they have information and they need to take their statement. And Snow tells Bigby to try to be nice. And especially because this was during my bad playthrough, where if you pick this option, you get this really great line from Bigby, which is just,
I'm always nice.
so disconnected from all my terrible actions. Now from here you kind of actually have a couple different options, which is kind of cool. Essentially you can look at the body or talk to TJ, and you can do it in whatever order you want. I found that most people just talk to TJ first, but there is actually some differences if you decide to look at the body first. There will be some things that get brought up when you're talking to TJ, like the fact that the things that were tied around the lady's legs were cinder blocks, which you figured out from looking at the body. And it's just kind of cool to have like these little differences that make it feel like there was an actual difference in the order that you decided to look at things. Which, by the way, TJ is basically talking about the fact that the body was dumped in the water when he was swimming. Another kind of little cool thing is that during this section you can go and look at multiple things and ask the mirror more questions, things that don't make major impacts on the story, but one of the things is that you can examine Snow's perfume, which might seem just out of nowhere, but then when you're examining the body, if you have looked at Snow's perfume, you'll find that the body did have Snow's perfume on it, and you will make that connection with like an extra line of dialogue.
Also, I saw the bottle on your desk.
I mean, either way, he'll know it's Snow's just because he has a really good sense of smell, but just having that extra line of dialogue because you looked at it before is kind of cool. Like, it's just neat to be like, hey, like, me looking at that object did have a small impact on the story. Like, there was a lot of little things and differences that I didn't actually expect to be in the game at all. So examining the body, you find out that, in fact, it is Holly's sister who had essentially been glamored to look like Snow White. You also find out that the glamour isn't perfect. Like, there's a lot of little details that are subtly different, and or things that glamour should have covered up but didn't, so you can assume the fact that the glamour is kind of like a black market, not an official kind, which technically isn't illegal to make, but is very frowned upon. Oh, and something kind of interesting is the fact that you can actually choose to not talk to TJ at all, which I didn't even realize was a choice, but you can just genuinely decide that it's not worth talking to TJ after looking at the body and just leave. From here, you basically are going to go and talk to Holly about it and tell her that her sister's dead, and you have the choice on whether or not Snow comes with you or not. Obviously, she's not going to be too happy if you tell her to stay behind, but either way with this choice, it's basically just going to impact how Snow feels, because if you go without her, she will end up just coming anyway later on. This ends up coming in handy though, because Snow ends up basically being really comforting to Holly and giving her a piece of her sister's belongings. And this gets her to give more information about her sister and the fact that she worked at a place called the Puddin' and Pie, where essentially they're kind of scammed by getting money and then getting debts over and over that they can never pay fully. So they're just kind of constantly in this cycle of having to work there to pay off debts, but gaining more debts, and it's just an endless cycle, and they kind of get stuck working there. When you get to the Pudding and Pie, you get to meet Georgie. He's great. I love him. Essentially, he's trying not to give you any information, but then actually one of his employees ends up leaking the fact that there's apparently a well-documented black book that has every customer and what client they were with and at what time. Georgie tries to deny this, so then you have the choice to either destroy different things in the place or to just kind of threaten to destroy things but not actually do that. Either way you go, it's going to lead to the same conclusion, which is that he finally does cave and give you the black book, but it does change how people look at you. I find that a lot of the smaller choices in The Wolf Among Us, while not having a humongous impact on the overall plot, is more about what kind of Big B you end up being. Like, do you be this big bad wolf that he was, or do you try to be this new Big B who is trying to turn things around? Like, your choices on either riding that line or trying to be really nice or going back to what he was, kind of this monster, that's kind of up to you. And like, characters will look at you differently based on these choices. So while this doesn't change whether or not you get the book or not, it does change how people look at you. So he eventually shows you the book, and there's this really funny line.
What's 207? Room number?
I don't fucking know. Millimeters, maybe?
And sadly, the names are all like fake in there, but you do find the room number of the hotel where they did it. From there, you end up meeting Narissa and talking to her a little bit about it. And you find out that for some reason, she is like not able to talk about work. Like, whether or not that's because she's threatened to not talk about it or what, but there's just something stopping her from talking about work at all. So instead, she ends up setting up a appointment with you, quote unquote, to go to that hotel where the room number is. That way you can investigate room 207 and actually see if there are any clues in there. When you arrive at the hotel, you find that Beauty actually is working the front desk. So like, while she's not doing any really dark, shady things, she's just kind of working this crappy job running the front desk at this hotel. And she didn't want Beast to know about it because he wants to be the caretaker. He wants to take care of her, but they're doing really bad on money. And so she was doing this to get them to be able to stay in their really nice apartment in the woodlands and everything. And depending on whether or not you told Beast, she will either be kind of pissed off with you if you did end up just straight up telling him, or she'll be like thankful that you didn't tell him. She ends up coming with you to check out the room. And then there's this wonderful, wonderful misunderstanding where Beast sees the fact that Big B and his wife are going into a hotel room together at this really shady motel where people just have sex. I don't know why he's there, honestly. My only assumption is that he's just been creeping and following her to figure out what she's doing, and then he saw that she was there, but I don't know. It's just terrible timing, man. I don't... What? And this is where our obligatory combat section of the episode is, where you have to fight him because no matter what you do, he's just like too angry and he has to attack you. You can choose to show mercy and not finish him off, or you can choose to continue to punch him and to be really rude. Which again, this is definitely a thing of like building up your rep. Are you a good person or a bad person? Other than that, doesn't make a difference. Either way, the fight ends in basically breaking through the door and finding the room just covered in blood. The bed is just covered in it. From here, you investigate, find out that there are a lot of things that are lining up with Snow White's fairy tale story. There's the poison apple, flowers on the bed, the outfit. It all matches up with Snow White's fairy tale and is extremely creepy. And then you find pictures of Crane being the one that did it. And there's kind of this really cool little shot where while they're figuring this out, if you pay close attention, you'll see that the outer rim of the frame is the magic mirror, And so you kind of get a little hint that Crane is looking at them through the magic mirror before the actual full reveal that Crane was, and then he smashes the mirror. And that's episode 2. Something else I'd like to bring up that's kind of interesting. Each of these episodes were very much made at completely separate times from the last one. So they would finish an episode and then they would start working on the next one, which means that if you played this at launch, there were very variable dates between episodes. Some of them took months, some of them only took a couple, some of them took a lot more, because they essentially were working on an episode by episode basis. And that means that a lot of things they thought were going to be a certain way ended up not. It all works together in the end, but it's just interesting because they have these previews for the next episodes at the end of previous ones, and they hint towards like what's going to happen in the next episode, and a lot of them are very off and weird, and it's kind of interesting to see what their original idea of the next episode was going to be, and then finding that it is actually extremely different. Like in episode 1, they hint towards the fact that in episode 2 we're going to see Bigby's next bigger form, and then in the entirety of episode 2 we never see it. And then they use that exact same preview in episode 3.
Jesus Christ, Bigby. Is that you?
Okay, now on to episode 3. We're back to that good stuff. So basically, you want to warn Snow White. And Beast talks about the fact that he overheard that there was a funeral going on and that Snow was going to be there for Lily. So you rush on over there. Here you have the choice on whether or not you interrupt the funeral. Basically, if you don't, you listen to Snow's entire whole speech she gives, and it's really nice, and you can look at some of the items of Lily's and kind of just get to know her a little bit better. And then once she's done, she'll come and talk to you privately, and you can have that conversation with her. Otherwise, you could just interrupt the funeral and make everyone really upset and try to talk to Snow earlier. After telling Snow that you think it's Crane and everything, she ends up having to go back and keep talking. And then the Tweedle brothers show up. Yay! Essentially, they heard that you were going to go after Crane, and so now they're threatening you to stay away from them with shotguns. But then Holly and Gren both notice that they're doing this and get really upset, and they start like fighting each other. You could try to calm them down, but it doesn't end up working, and either way a fight's gonna break out, which involves Gren, Holly, and you all getting shot by shotguns. It is intro time. Bigby ends up getting healed up by a doctor, and it turns out that both Gren and Holly are okay too, just injured. And after Bigby radiates top energy for a little bit,
So, to recap,
you guys are coming up with a new plan. Essentially, I didn't go that much into detail about it before, but the magic mirror lets you look in on other people. Essentially, you can just ask the mirror, like, hey, show me this person, and it'll show where they are and what they're doing in the exact moment you ask. But because Crane smashed it, it can't be used anymore. And while Buffkin was trying to put these pieces back together and everything, it turns out that Crane took a piece with him, and it takes forever for the mirror to mend. So basically, without the shard, it's going to take way too long to find him using the mirror, so instead, you guys are looking for any clues Crane could have left. There's a pretty interesting little conversation that happens here between Bigby and Snow. She ends up kind of asking, she said that she's heard that you kind of like it when things go wrong. Now, what's kind of weird about this is that during a playthrough where you're trying to be a really good Bigby who's changed, you might assume that the best answer would be to say no, like, I don't like when bad things happen. So, like, for my playthrough and all the playthroughs that I did with other people watching them play, they all kind of picked the no, I don't like it, which is actually comes across really mean. Like, Bigby's really mean and defensive about it and kind of a jerk and just kind of shuts her down completely. But you would think that would be the really good option. But since I got to do a bad playthrough this time, I ended up just saying, so what if I do? And then that's actually, like, in my opinion, the way better option.
So what if I do? You think we're broken or something? Is that it?
I don't know. Maybe we're just not cut out for this world. We can't eat each other's hearts anymore, Bigby. This can't be like the old days. We have to make it better.
They end up having kind of a one-on-one moment where they both realize that they kind of both feel that way, that they're just used to their old lifestyle in the woodlands where they constantly had bad stuff happen and enjoyed it, and that it is hard for them to transition to this new life where they gotta try to be better, and that maybe they just aren't cut out for it. Like, it's kind of a cool little moment that I never got to see before, because I always assumed that would be the bad option to pick. During this section, you get a little bit of freedom to like look around for different clues, similar to like how I talked about with the perfume, where if you looked at that added a little bit of changes in dialogue. You can talk to Buffkin, and he'll give you this information that Crane had essentially, before he left, made a phone call saying that he needed to see his witch. It's not going to make like a humongous difference to the overall story, because either way, if like you continue on without talking to Buffkin, he will eventually bring it up in a future conversation. But if you do talk to him ahead of time, then you'll bring it up and you already know about it when you get to that conversation. It's just a small difference, but it's one that like is impactful, and it's kind of cool to be like, because I took the extra time to go and optionally talk to Buffkin, there was a difference, even if it's pretty much the same outcome. There's also this scene that I kind of really like where essentially you find a locked drawer in Crane's desk, and Bigby looks to Snow for approval, and she just nods, and he breaks it open and looks at her, and they both just smile at each other. Like, it's just a sweet little wholesome moment. I love it. So from here, we bring up Buffkin's information, which is that Crane is going to meet with his witch at 2 a.m. But you have 3 places you can search to try to find info or anything about this witch, but you have a limited time to do it. On top of this, Bluebeard, the most piece of shit dick character in the entire series, I hate him so much. He says that basically he's gonna help, and whatever place you go to, he'll go to another and divide and conquer, except for the fact that you can't trust Bluebeard at all, so you're essentially gotta pick which place you think is gonna be the most likely first, because for all you know, Bluebeard's gonna ruin the other places. Now with these choices, essentially, they all take about the same amount of time. I haven't found an order that changes the amount of time that it uses up or anything like that. Essentially, the way this choice works is that there's going to be 2 places you can go to. Technically, you can go to all 3, but one is always going to be useless to you. Essentially, Bluebeard is going to either choose to go to Dee's office or to Crane's apartment, depending on your choice. So if you pick anything but Crane's apartment, he'll go there, and if you pick Crane's apartment first, then he'll go to Dee's office. At Dee's office, you kind of have this like really cool situation where you get to talk to Flycatcher and get to know him better, and he's like this really nice guy and he helps you out and you find info, and from this you get to learn the witch's name, which is Auntie Greenleaf. At Holly's apartment, when you're going through Lily's things, you get this really interesting moment where you get to talk to Gren and you get to talk to the woodsman, and they're both been drinking a ton because they're all kind of sad about Lily's death. There's a slight dialogue change depending on whether or not you chose to interrogate one of the Tweedle brothers or you chose to interrogate the woodsman, because you get that little information from the woodsman about how he was sleeping with Lily. So either this is kind of a reveal moment where you get to learn about this because Gren found out and he tells it to you, or you already know this and it's just like, oh crap, Gren found out, and there's like a little bit of difference there, which is kind of cool. Either way, I kind of love this scene because we get to know Gren a lot better, and we get to know the woodsman a lot better, and we get to see a conflict between them, and it kind of ends hilariously with Gren just completely passing out. He won't remember this. There's also this kind of sweet moment you have where when you go in the back to look through Lily's things, Holly's back there. She's completely drugged up. She's very, very far gone, and she kind of ends up thinking that you're the woodsman. And you can choose whether or not to talk to her. And either way, you'll get to learn quite a bit about her thoughts and her true feelings on Bigby. Like, she kind of sees him as a pain in the ass, but depending on your choices so far, she can either be like, he doesn't care about anyone, or, hey, you know, he does seem to like care and he is trying. And it's kind of just a sweet moment, and it is impacted by the choices and how you've talked to people and how you've acted up until this point. Also, when you're talking to Holly, you can actually choose whether or not you let Holly know if it's you, Bigby, or if you choose to kind of just keep this presence as the woodsman. And that changes the dialogue completely, because it goes from you kind of talking in the third person about yourself, or her talking directly to Bigby, and knowing it's you. And there's quite a few little differences in the dialogue, and that was pretty cool. I like that that's a choice and that there is different dialogue for it. In Lily's belongings, you end up finding a notebook that has the address of Auntie Greenleaf. It doesn't have her name, but it has her initials, so essentially, if you go to this place first, you don't get all the information you need. Neither place will give you everything you need. Now, like I said before, there's quite a bit of changes here, so if you end up going to Dee's office or Holly's bar first, Bluebeard is going to go to Crane's apartment and he's going to trash it. He's going to burn a bunch of his stuff. There's going to be nothing left for you there. So if you choose to go to Crane's apartment as your second option, you're just going to arrive, see that everything was destroyed by Bluebeard, and leave and go to the third place. So the only way to actually get to explore Crane's apartment is if it's your first option. Now, in all my previous playthroughs or ones where I watched other people play, I never got to see Crane's apartment because most people picked one of the other ones first, and you have to pick Crane's apartment first to actually get to see it in full working order. Essentially, if you choose to go to Crane's apartment first, you'll find that he's not there, but there's tons of cool stuff you get to learn about him that you probably didn't know before. There's tons of things to look at. There's evidence to the fact that he's been giving the Crooked Man money, which is a name that you probably don't really know yet. Unless you're like me and have played this several times and then you go, whoa, foreshadowing that I never got to see before. Essentially, you'll end up going into one of the back rooms in Crane's apartment. This door, by the way, to the room is locked and you need a key. But if you go to that door first, instead of finding the key in his stuff earlier and try to open it just by like busting it down, it's pretty funny because injured Bigby.
Okay, well, there's gotta be an easier way.
And that is like such a specific thing because the first time I tried Crane's apartment, I just found the key naturally, just looking through his stuff way before I ever found the door that it unlocked. So I didn't think that honestly would be an option, but for some reason I tried to experiment with it and I found that little hilarious scene, and it's such a cool detail I appreciate. And you'll find that Jack is there. You've met him earlier at Holly's bar. I didn't really talk about him much, but he's annoying. And then you bicker with him for like 20 minutes about why he's there and how he's basically actually just there to steal things because Crane's not there. But he does end up giving you some information in return for you letting him go, which is that the name of his witch is Auntie Greenleaf. So basically now you got her name a different way. And then Snow White shows up and he's busted. Also, during this conversation with Jack, I was bad Bigby, so I tried to punch him because there's literally like so many options to just punch people during Bigby's bad playthrough. And it's kind of a cool detail that because you were injured at the beginning of the episode, he just fails really spectacularly at punching him. So because I had never picked Crane's apartment first, I didn't actually know what was going to happen with Bluebeard. So I ended up actually going and checking out Dee's office because that's where he goes if you decide to check Crane's apartment first. And it's kind of sad. I never got to see it. You don't get to know that much about Flycatcher because you only get a very brief scene where you talk to him a tiny bit. And he still comes across as a really nice guy and everything. But apparently Bluebeard just basically broke in there, beat up Flycatcher, destroyed the place. So there's like nothing left for you to find. And you kind of just end up leaving pretty quick. And it's sad because Flycatcher's so cool. And he did not deserve to get beat up by Bluebeard. Bluebeard is the worst. Cancel Bluebeard, please. And then you'll end up going to Holly's bar and getting the address. So basically, no matter what, you are going to end up going to Holly's bar and seeing that scene. But it's mainly like whether or not you get all this extra information on Crane and you get the name through that, or whether or not you get a lot more information about the Tweedle brothers and get the name through that. And it's cool because either way you're missing out on something, so you can't see all the content in one playthrough, and that's a way more impactful choice. Having these cool character moments and getting to meet these people you wouldn't have met otherwise and getting to know more information about certain characters and not others, but only being able to do one per playthrough is really cool. It made replaying this game 3 times. These were some of the scenes that made it worth it, and this is what makes episode 3 really cool, is that it is one of the bigger episodes in terms of differences with choice. It's cool that I got to play this game for the 3rd time in a row just in the last couple months, and like the 6th time total, and see content that I never got to see before, hear lines of dialogue I never heard before. Like, it's cool. Basically, you tell Snow about all this on the phone, and then you agree to go and meet up at the witch's place. But no matter what, from what I could tell, you're always going to be 15 minutes late, and you're just going to have missed Crane. But I don't know if there is some secret way to be on time, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't matter. You're always going to be 15 minutes late, which makes sense because then there wouldn't be able to have a really cool scene later, which we'll get to that. So when you arrive to the witch's place, a little girl answers the door. Or if you're bad, Bigby, they let you kick in the door, and it is the most hilarious thing in the world. He just literally bad Bigby is so fun. I'm excited to talk about that when we get to that section, but just kick the door in. Essentially, you search Auntie Greenleaf's apartment while trying to keep this kid calm because she's so freaked out. Apparently, her mom is Auntie Greenleaf, and she doesn't like people touching her stuff or getting involved, but we need to search the apartment. Crane's not there, but there are signs that he was there recently. And just when you're about to leave, you end up finding another container for glamour, similar to what you found on Lily's body. When you try to open it, this makes the little girl super, super upset until she finally reveals herself to have been Auntie Greenleaf the whole time, and she just was using magic to fake her appearance. Talking to her for a little bit, she doesn't initially want to give up Crane, and she has good points that she brings up about why she does the work that she does, why she does this black market glamour, even though it is really screwed up that she's making glamours to let prostitutes look like Snow White. At the same time, she doesn't really have a lot of opportunities here. Everybody who moved from the Woodlands to New York is now struggling really hard, and to just stay in her small little apartment costs a ton of money. This is the only way she's able to afford it. And it's interesting when she brings up these points because you kind of feel for her, even though she is doing this shady stuff and is technically not on your side. There's also this tree in there which she uses to make the glamours, and Snow White, kind of understandably upset, seeing as this personally involves her and her appearance, wants Bigby to basically burn the tree, especially since Auntie Greenleaf is not giving you any information on Crane whatsoever. So this is the next major choice. Essentially, as soon as you threaten to burn her tree, she does give up information on Crane, like the fact that he took this ring that's supposed to supposedly let the girls at the pudding and pie talk and reveal his innocence and everything. And so he's over there trying to get the girls to talk. And then you still have the choice on whether or not you burn the tree anyway. If you burn the tree, she gets really upset, and it definitely will come into play later. If you don't, Snow kind of gets upset at you because she basically directly orders you to do it and you can just refuse anyway. And there's even a subtle dialogue option where you can offer Auntie Greenleaf a job at the Woodlands instead, because you do feel for her situation. You can offer her that job, which is kind of cool. And that actually does come a little bit into play later. So finally, they head over to the pudding pie.
Where's Crane?
Ichabod Crane? What would that nerd have with a place like this?
Tell me what you know, now!
And they find Crane. Woo! He's trying to use the ring on the girls. It's not working. But he definitely comes across as a guy who didn't do it. Up till this point, there's been hints after hints from both characters and just evidence you find that Crane is not exactly the murdering type. He's not the person that could actually do it. While there is definitely evidence that he did this creepy stuff with Lily as she was glamored as Snow, there isn't evidence that he actually killed her other than the fact that it happened in that same spot. Snow even hints that she doesn't feel like he could do it. Tons of other characters continuously say over and over again that he's not the kind of guy who would be able to do that. And here's a little flaw that I don't really like in this episode, is that even if you decide for yourself after hearing all of this, or even from the beginning, I've had people be like, I don't think Crane really did it. I feel like that's too obvious. The game kind of forces you into that perspective that Crane is the murderer no matter what. Even at this scene, where Snow ultimately decides that she really doesn't think Crane did it and is trying to explain that to Bigby, it gives you several dialogue options that are basically all the same perspective of, no, Crane did it. Like, you can't really just be like, you know what, I agree with you. You basically have to counter her until she gives you complete evidence and explains herself completely, to which then Bigby's like, oh, okay, maybe Crane didn't do it. But then here you are as the player, like, I didn't even think Crane did it. I did. Like, I mean, obviously you still need to take him in, though, because he was giving Fabletown money away to the Crooked Man. And also, he still did some really creepy, screwed up stuff. Essentially, you take him out into the alley, and you're just gonna, like, take him into custody when a really shady car pulls up and follows you down the alley, and then you get blocked in by more cars. And thus we are once again introduced to the Tweedle brothers, along with a new fun little friend to add to the mix, Bloody Mary. She explains that basically she works for the Crooked Man and that he wants Crane. And obviously, you're not gonna just give up Crane like that. So then you just get shot a lot. And you're dead, and then the game ends. So remember that, like, hyped up after credits scene that they've been hyping up for 2 episodes? That new transformation for Bigby? It looks real cool, real exciting. Well, the payoff actually is really worth it. It's really cool. Essentially, Bigby gets back up after literally everyone's just like, oh dang, we just gunned down Bigby. Bigby's just dead. And then he's literally just taking shells over and over again and just powering through it as he transforms into an even bigger wolf form. And it's just the music and the effects and the lighting and the design. It's just all really, really cool. The whole setup is just really awesome. And then you could go and choose different things and you just start tearing everything apart, throwing things. You beat the crap out of both the Tweedles. And then you have the option, which is the last big choice of the episode, on whether or not you killed Dumb. Obviously, this will change whether or not he's there for the rest of the series. This will change how people look at you humongously. Like, this is going to be something that is brought up. After you make that choice, it's like seemingly you won, and then suddenly Bigby gets shot by something that seems to be impacting him a lot more than normal. Essentially, Bloody Mary shot him with a silver bullet, which does work on Bigby. She even mentions the fact that you'd think it would only work on pure werewolves, but it does work on Bigby. And then just when she's about to, like, axe your head off with the woodsman's axe that she somehow got, Snow White ends up stopping her and trading Crane for your life. The Crooked Man ends up agreeing to this deal, but not before Bloody Mary just completely decimates your arm. Your arm, it's fucked up, bro. That arm not doing too hot. And then they leave. That was an awesome ending. That's the end of the episode. What a good episode. Like, that is just a great climax. So much happened in that episode. So many good choices. Great episode. Time to go back to mediocrity. Okay, so remember how Bigby got totally fucked last episode? Well, we start with a nice little nightmare sequence where Bloody Mary just is, like, really freaky and stuff. And then we wake up and the doctor's healing us yet again. Basically, he talks about the fact that he's removing all of the little bits of shrapnel from the silver bullet, and that if he doesn't remove all of them, then you would die. All while Bigby's arm is, like, super screwed up, man. And then Bigby decides that he's gonna fix his arm himself while the doctor gets the shrapnel out. Why did I just show you that in excruciating length? Because I had to suffer through it 3 times, so I figured you would enjoy it. Like, wow, look at that. Wow. Hear that sound effect? Ooh, that's the good stuff right there. Ooh, good stuff. And then the doctor basically warns Bigby that if he takes another silver round anywhere near his heart, then he probably isn't going to make it. There's this cute little scene afterwards where Snow and Bigby talk, and Snow... And remember back in... what episode was that? Okay, remember back in episode 2, when there was that, like, little dialogue where you could be like, I'm glad you're not dead to Snow, and I said that would come back into play later? Well, this is where it comes back into play. Well, there's this cute little scene with Bigby and Snow where Snow brings it back up and says the same thing to him. Otherwise, she still, like, shows concern and everything, and it's still a cute scene, but I love that the little detail of you saying that specific line in episode 2 gets brought back in episode 4 if you said it. Otherwise, it's something different. Like, that's cool. I love that. It's cute. Pick that dialogue option, please. Snow gives you a little big lecture about how, you can't be changing into that beast form whenever things go wrong. We gotta be better than the bad guys. I mean, clearly Bigby had an option when he got shotgunned like 1,000 times. That, yeah, he shouldn't have done that, really. That was bad. And then she brings up the fact that Colin, the pig guy that lives in your apartment, I don't know if you remember, should definitely be going back to the farm since he's not using glamour. And you kind of have the choice to tell her whether or not he's going back to the farm and, like, agree with her or not. And then afterwards you make the actual choice when you talk to Colin to be like, yeah, I'll try to convince her, or no, you gotta go to the farm. And this will actually change whether or not he goes to the farm in episode 5. Also, Bigby got a call that basically Nerissa really wanted to talk to him. And so you're going to your office. Intro time. For the most part, this conversation with Nerissa goes nowhere because she has this ribbon on that is basically stopping her from talking. So the main point of this conversation is that you figure out that the ribbon is what is stopping Nerissa from being able to talk about the situation or work. And she knows a ton, but she just can't say it. And removing the ribbon is confirmed as bad, so we don't do that. Snow ends up opening the door at an extremely awkward time to just create some really, really awkward tension between everybody and misunderstanding probably, but luckily it doesn't really go anywhere. Basically, Snow tells you that Beauty and Beast called the office and wants you to come and visit their apartment, and Nerissa just heavily hints that is a really good idea that you go and see them. Oh boy, this next scene is it's so fun. Have a great time. All 3 playthroughs just loved this scene. Oh. So essentially when you knock on the door, either Beauty or Beast will come up to the door. And this whole scene is kind of cool in the fact that it's different depending on whether or not you lied for Beauty. If you did lie for Beauty, then Beast opens the door, and this whole conversation that you have with them, he will just be a complete prick to you the whole time. It's really annoying. And if you told the truth to Beast, then Beauty will come and answer the door, and she'll be like a prick to you the whole time. And so they basically switch roles depending on whether or not you lied for her, and it'll be like, oh, I didn't call you if you, like, and Beast will be like, I didn't call you if you lied for her, or Beauty will be like, I didn't call you if you told Beast the truth. Like, essentially the other partner called you behind the other person's back, and because they thought you could help and they had information, but then they're fighting, and it's just, their marriage is, it's rocky, bro. It's not doing too hot. They're like, hey, we gotta talk for a minute. Go ahead and, like, look around our apartment and see how expensive and stupid it is. And then there's this long, drawn-out conversation where they can't agree on the fact of whether or not they should actually tell you the information that they know. And then they get this really shady phone call, which you can choose to answer or let the voicemail play and, like, stop them, or they can stop it themselves. None of these choices matter, because if you pick up the phone, you don't get to talk to them before they hang up. If you just listen to the voicemail, you get to hear the same thing as if you picked up the phone, basically, which is that, hey, we want our money, bro. And then if you let one of them pick up the phone, then they won't hear it. Then you won't hear it, but then they'll tell you about it immediately after and finally cave. So it doesn't matter. This is just stupid. This whole scene, I hate it. It's so boring. So after bickering with these people for like 15 minutes, they're finally like, okay, we'll give you the information, I guess. Basically, you find out that there's a place called the Lucky Pawn, where essentially it's a pawn shop front, but there is the ability to get a loan from the Crooked Man through there. A loan that is extremely shady, and you'll never be able to fully pay back. And essentially, they got a loan from there because they were running into money issues. Because they just couldn't afford to keep their super fancy and really nice apartment. They're just struggling so hard with money issues. We wouldn't understand, because us simpletons, we can't understand that they need that lifestyle. And then we also find out that Beast basically did a couple jobs for the Crooked Man, delivering packages that apparently, like, he delivers it to this meat shop, and he is very sure that what he's delivering isn't meat, but he isn't sure what it is. So you now have the option of either going to the meat shop or going to the Lucky Pawn. And what's hilarious about this, and a little awkward, and kind of just another thing where I'm like, episode 4, you're weird, is that you make the choice, and then right after you make the choice, Beauty goes, hey, just to let you know, I think once you go to one, you're gonna like cause attention, so the other one might not work anymore. But you can't change your choice at this point. It's locked in. So literally she's warning you to be careful about your choice after you've made the choice. It's kind of stupid. I don't know. And I know I said both episodes 2 and 4 are mediocre. But when I say that, I mean, they're still good. Mediocre is in comparison to the other episodes. But like part of the Wolf Among Us whole, it's still a good episode. And like it still gives a lot of cool moments, like the gruesome arm scene, which I'm just putting in here yet again. I think the best comparison I can draw is comparing the Netflix Daredevil season 2 to seasons 1 and 3. Like season 2 is still good and a lot better than like a ton of other shows, but in comparison to season 1 and 3, it's mediocre. The 1 and 3 are amazing, so when 2 doesn't live up to the amazing, that it's kind of feels mediocre in comparison to the others. But when you compare it to other shows, you're like, yeah, Daredevil season 2 is still good. And also, if you think season 2 is better than 1 or 3, you're wrong, but it's okay. So this was our major choice of the episode, was do you go to the Lucky Pawn or the butcher shop? And essentially, if you go to the butcher shop first, you will come across this guy. He's the owner. He's basically trying to hide the fact that, they do business out of his business. He's not actually a butcher shop. The Crooked Man is running supplies through his shop, and it's just a front. And that's made very obvious from the beginning, and you already know this, but he's going to try to convince you otherwise for a solid 5 minutes. And then you basically follow him into the back of the shop, but he already hits this, like, red button. Essentially, no matter what you do, he's always going to hit that red button. You're going to follow him into the meat shop, and he's going to be trying to get into this gate. When you get in the gate, you see that this is actually a place where they essentially have slaves just chained up making magic potions. You can look at this chalkboard and just see how far the corruption goes and how many people the Crooked Man has under his thumb. Now, there isn't as big of a difference with episode 3 in terms of the big choice of episode 4. Like episode 3, I think, and its big choice was probably the highlight in terms of differences in big choices. Episode 4's is not nearly as big. Essentially, the difference if you go to the meat shop first or second is that when you arrive into this room is either the chalkboards will be completely erased or they'll still have stuff on them. So you get a teeny little bit of extra information because you went there first, and I guess that means that they didn't have as much time to erase everything. So now for the Lucky Pawn. The difference here is if you go to the Lucky Pawn first, you'll arrive there while Jack's still working. And if he's still working, you get to argue with him about whether or not the Crooked Man does things there. Eventually, Jersey, the actual shop owner, shows up, and Jack hightails it out of there. And then the woodsman shows up and essentially is looking for his huntsman axe because he heard that it did end up in the pawn shop at some point, which Beast hinted to earlier was the reason why Bloody Mary had the woodsman's axe. Basically, the woodsman ends up finding the actual display case that was for his axe, so he knows that it was there, and they start fighting, and you can choose to intervene or not, but either way, they're going to bring you into the fight, and then here's our fight scene for the episode. You have a couple cool choices. It's a pretty cool scene. Jersey fights dirty, and I think the coolest part is that the woodsman ends up helping you out. When you're in like a scenario where you're having a hard time escaping, he ends up just axing the Jersey, and he basically gives you a chance to interrogate Jersey, to which you find out that the crooked man essentially has a door that goes and travels in multiple areas, like it's constantly on the move, and it's the only way to get to him is to get to that door, but it's constantly changing, so you have to hurry and figure out where it is. Like, it's kind of impossible to know without the crooked man telling you. And after learning this, you and Woody both walk outside, and you kind of have like this cool little bonding moment. You could choose to obviously be a jerk and just kind of throw it out and be like, whatever.
I should have hit you with this thing.
But you can kind of be like, hey, you know what? Thanks for helping me out back there. You're not the worst guy, Woody. And he kind of even is like rooting for you and wants you to catch the people that did murder those girls. I forgot to mention the only other thing that's different is depending on where you go first, the magic mirror shard is going to be in the second location. I don't know how this works. I don't think this makes much sense to me when I was thinking about it, but essentially no matter what, you're always going to find the shard in the second place. And also you can find proof in his coat, which is completely optional. It depends on if you happen to pick the third one first, that he did steal the picture from Snow that was used to make the glamour. So you return back to the office, you got the shard, you give it to Buffkin. He's going to put the mirror back together. It's just going to take a couple minutes. And then you talk to Snow White. She's so proud of you. She's so proud. But then she tells you that essentially Toad had come into the office and he wants money compensation for the car that you may or may not have fallen on in episode 1. But essentially the office doesn't have the ability to give him that money. And also she tells you that you have to send him to the farm because he still hasn't gotten glamored. So here you have the choice on whether or not you tell Toad that you're going to try to convince Snow White to let him stay or give him more time, or you can choose to tell him that he is going to have to go back to the farm. And also you explain to Snow afterwards the whole situation with the loans and the products, and you basically explain, get her up to speed. So now that the magic mirror is back together, you can use it to show the crooked man's door. Bigby ends up recognizing the place and he just runs out to go get it. Before he leaves, Snow tells him to bring the crooked man in alive. But obviously that choice is not up to her. And then Bigby goes running in and he makes it to the door in time and gets in. To which we are met by Tiny Tim, who is not so tiny anymore, but still crippled. I'm sorry, that was probably offensive. Tim essentially explains the fact that the crooked man gave him a job, that when Tim couldn't find a job anywhere else, the crooked man saw value in him and still provided him with something he can do. He believes in Tim when no one else would because of his conditions. And then you have this choice where essentially you can wait for Tim or you can just speed ahead of him. This only has like a minor impact where essentially when you enter the door, the crooked man will be all smug and be like, I knew that he wouldn't wait for you, Tim. The big bad wolf is just such a jerk. And if you do wait for him, the crooked man basically just goes, hey, good job, Tim. Thanks. And also, Bigby, you still suck. So, I mean, either way, he doesn't have the highest opinion of you. Oh, by the way, did I mention that pretty much every single bad person you've run into in the entire season is in this room? That's slightly intimidating, I'm not gonna lie. As is the crooked man's really crooked eye. Basically, the crooked man just is like, hey, let's all chill out, everyone. Bigby, just come in and let's talk. And then you have several different options, and like 3 out of the 4 involve Bigby doing a really cool smoke.
All right, you got me here. Let's talk.
It's pretty cheesy, and then the episode just ends on him lighting his cigarette, and that's how they decided to end that episode. So I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit more about episode 4. I think what makes it my least favorite episode in the whole season is how much of it feels like padding to me. Talking to Jack, talking to Beauty and Beast, and talking to the Butcher all feel like such wastes of time. Because literally, on one hand, it does build this whole thing that everybody's really afraid of talking about the Crooked Man because they know the consequences of doing so, and so everyone's really tight-lipped, and it does keep that part of it. But at the same time, it just feels like it gets annoying when you're just literally trying to make any progress whatsoever, and it involves you having a 15-minute fight to just get someone to admit something that you already know. It's really annoying and slow in comparison to any of the other episodes of the season. The choices of episode 4 aren't really humongously impactful. There's no real huge choice or really interesting one, and the differences are very minor. And then it felt like the fight scene was pretty obligatory, like, well, we gotta have our climactic action moment in this episode, so it'll happen. And while there is the cool moment with the woodsman, and I think that makes it worth it, it still feels like a kind of forced fight scene that's really short and not that interesting just so that they could have a fight scene this episode. So episode 4 is kind of my least favorite. But it does set up so much for another great episode. Luckily, I am happy to say that all of that kind of build-up and tedium of episode 4 builds up to a really awesome climax with 5. It just goes straight into the intro, by the way. Essentially, you have a conversation with the Crooked Man where he tries to explain that the reason those girls died was because Georgie misinterpreted his orders. So I can only assume the Crooked Man had basically told Georgie, thrill them. But then Georgie had heard, murder them brutally. And there's kind of like this small detail here where basically, before he tells you that Georgie was the one who did it, you can make a guess, or you can say that you have no idea who did it. And if you do guess Georgie and get it right, the Crooked Man actually does compliment you. He's like, wow, I didn't think you would actually have figured it out. And I mean, it's up to the player, especially on your first playthrough, on whether or not you've managed to figure out with the evidence so far that it was Georgie who did it. So it's kind of cool. Like, it's a rewarding feeling to have the Crooked Man respect you for actually figuring it out. So first, the Crooked Man's like, don't worry, we're handling this issue internally. He will be punished accordingly, but obviously you're not going to take that. So then he's like, why don't you just take him in? Why don't you just arrest him? But no matter what, basically you and the Crooked Man are not going to see eye to eye. You want to take down everybody. And so there's a huge disagreement. Everybody starts getting upset. The Crooked Man finally gives up on trying to just talk, and he goes and escapes with Bloody Mary while everyone else starts to attack you. Thus begins the climax. I don't like the word climax anymore. I'm going to stop saying that. There's a really cool fight scene where Bigby's just taking everyone on. He ends up stabbing Georgie with his own knife, so then he tries to make a mad escape. Bigby chases him down in his second wolf form. And there's this interesting little bar that appears. I've kind of figured it out, but I feel like on your first playthrough, you're not going to really know what this bar is supposed to mean. But I think essentially what it is that this is a timer. Essentially, you need to make it to the end of this QuickTime event section without this bar reaching 0. And every mistake you make will make that bar reach 0 faster. It's kind of like a timer. If it reaches 0, then you will have failed kind of thing. So as long as you're like doing decent with the QuickTime events, it's not an issue. But I guess it adds like a little bit of more uncertainty, a little bit more of like, oh god, I gotta actually do good in this section. Like, I can respect it. There's some cool car running, there's some jumping all over the place, there's busting through a door and going upstairs. And then there's this part where essentially you jump off of the highway and you're trying to land on the car. And you have a really interesting choice here. So essentially, on your first playthrough, luckily, it's set up over and over again that, hey, you're going after Georgie. So you're going to be looking for Georgie's car, and you're probably going to click on Georgie's car. But it gives you the option to click on the Crooked Man's car. And as soon as you pick Georgie, you'll see the fact that that was the Crooked Man's car, but you probably didn't know that ahead of time, or didn't have the time to process it. Which is a good thing, because I decided one of these playthroughs that I was going to click on the Crooked Man's car and see what actually happens. And you literally just instantly fail. Essentially, Bloody Mary just knocks you off the car and you're out. And oh my goodness, the consequences of failing this event are pretty major, actually. I'm first going to go over the successful version, and then I'll get into the failed version, but it's pretty different. Essentially, Georgie and... what's her name? Oh no. Essentially, Georgie and Vivian end up hiding out in the pudding and pie, and you kind of cool down, go back to your normal form, and go inside. Georgie's still dying because he did get stabbed with his own knife. And once you get there, essentially Georgie tries to explain everything that's going on and kind of defend himself. He explains first off that Vivian is apparently the ribbon girl, the original. And essentially she used her ribbon to create a bunch of other ribbons for the other people at the pudding and pie. Essentially the Crooked Man was controlling everything, including Georgie. Georgie's actions were all because of the Crooked Man. He made him kill all the girls. He makes him keep him in discretion. And essentially the only way to free the other girls from the spell of the ribbon is to kill Vivian, to remove her ribbon. Vivian makes it extremely clear that she feels a ton of guilt in this, and the fact that her keeping her life is keeping them from truly being free anymore. And she ends up in a very, sad scene taking her own life to free them.
I look at Narissa and I hate myself.
Vivian!
I can't pretend anymore.
What are you doing? Vivian! Don't! Vivian! No! Fuck! No, 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 no! Why'd you have to do that, Vivian? Vivian! Shit!
If it wasn't clear already by this point, it's very clear now that Georgie really cared about Vivian and is extremely sad by her passing. Georgie tells you essentially to go to the old foundry by the river to find the Crooked Man, because he wants payback for everything the Crooked Man made him do just as much as you. And Georgie kind of accepts the fact that he's going to die. At this point, he can't really survive from the wounds, and he asks you to make it quick for him, to which you have the choice to go and rip out his guts as mercy, or leave him there to die slowly. I think what I kind of like about this choice, though, is that there isn't one that's obviously good or obviously bad. You could technically say that showing him mercy and killing him quick is the good option, but if you choose to leave him, one of the dialogue options Bigby has is that I won't become a killer. So the game respects the fact that if you, on the morally good side, feel that killing anyone in any context is bad, that is an option, and you're not going to be seen as a bad person for letting Georgie suffer because you didn't want to murder him to put him out of his misery. And I like that. It's just a little detail, but I appreciate it. So now let's go down that failure route. Oh my goodness. I didn't expect this because I'd never seen anybody do it, and I'd never done it myself, of landing on the Crooked Man's car. My assumption is that if you fail the QuickTime events and that bar goes all the way down, it will lead to this same route, which is that you get knocked out, you wake up back in your normal form, and you get to the pudding and pie way later than you're supposed to. When you get there, Vivian's already dead. She already took off the ribbon and killed herself, and Georgie's just down on the ground, bleeding out. So Georgie kind of explains the whole situation again and everything the same, but with this new context of Vivian's already dead. You miss such a really good scene where Vivian feels all this guilt and she takes her own life right in front of you, and you miss all of that because you decided to land on the Crooked Man's car instead of Georgie's. I was not expecting such a dramatic change. I never knew that you could miss that whole scene with Vivian. So I'm kind of glad that I've never seen anybody actually pick it, because I think it's way worse. But at the same time, it is kind of cool that if you fail or if you pick the Crooked Man's card, that it does actually have a significant difference. You miss a huge scene by doing that. So you show up to that factory or foundry or whatever it was, And after a lot of build up and creepiness with Bloody Mary just talking about your life story, something I forgot to mention is that the episode 4 ending preview is one of my personal favorites. I just love the build up of it and the music, and I love Bloody Mary's commentary of the big bad wolf and his story.
The wolf is coming.
It's cool build up for episode 5. Bloody Mary finally shows herself, and essentially the Crooked Man's just gonna go hide away while Bloody Mary takes care of you. And this leads into the big fight. The big final fight. What I do like is that they give you some decent options here. You can choose to have the first half of the fight be up on some air ducts, or you can choose to have it be in this more cramped area to the side. And each one has their own completely unique fighting animations and own feel to them, which is cool. Like one, you're really high in the air balancing on these air ducts, and in the other you're in this really cramped space, and either way she's going to be attacking you a bunch, and you can basically just have to complete quick time events to defend yourself. And it does ultimately lead to the same thing of you and Bloody Mary both falling into the main area of the room. But it is cool that you get entirely different animations for fighting in a different scenario dependent on this first choice. By the way, Bloody Mary is terrifying. This whole final fight scene is just, it's so awesome. I love it so much. It's such a good climax. Bigby's in his form that, as far as we know, is his final form at the time. And he's just getting overwhelmed by just copies and copies of Bloody Mary and losing horribly, just for us to find out that he has one final form. And that whole reveal is just, I love it so much. And then he just starts destroying, and it's really cool. And all the animations are great. He even does the signature blowing your house down move. Oh, it's so good. And after Bigby kills Bloody Mary, completely contradicting your earlier statement where you wouldn't be a killer, there's this cool like little transition from his big wolf form back down to human form, which I appreciate. That's good direction right there. And then you go and confront the Crooked Man. Essentially, he has a gun with a silver bullet, and he wants you to take him in and give him a fair trial. Now, if you're on the good path, you're probably going to take him in anyway. That was your plan, so you're going to do that. But actually, you do have the option to kill him here. You can overpower him. He won't be able to shoot you. And you can literally murder him before you even get back. I'm first going to go over choosing not to murder him, because this changes this next scene pretty dramatically. Essentially, if you take him in, you bring him to the witching well, where a lot of Fabletown people are there, and you give him a fair trial. I think this scene is actually really cool because it shows how smart the Crooked Man is, and really shows his character and how he managed to get in the position he is. And the writing is so good that it really makes you feel like this is a guy who could get in the position he's in. He is smart enough. He is manipulative enough. And it's shown wonderfully here, because even when we explain all the stuff that the Crooked Man did and how he's corrupting everyone, and we get him, he keeps coming up with good counter arguments, or about the fact that there is no evidence. There's one section where he's getting the people on his side, and then you have this really cool speech that you and Snow give that gets the whole crowd back on your side. But then he pulls out something else and gets them back into being uncertain. The main thing that ends up throwing everybody off is the fact that you don't have any actual tangible evidence that the Crooked Man was involved with the murders. And something that is kind of cool is that in this scene, a lot of your past actions get brought up. Different people will talk good or bad about you depending on how you treated them in the game. If you burned Auntie Greenleaf's tree, she's not going to be on your side. If you didn't, she is going to say, well, Bigby didn't burn my tree. And remember when I talked about the fact that you could offer her a job? She'll even bring that up here, which is kind of cool. It's like a little extra thing to be like, and he did offer me a job. So depending on all of your actions towards Fabletown, it will change their opinion of you in this final piece and whether or not to be on your side. Now, how much that actually has an impact on the results, I think is 0, sadly. Essentially, no matter what happens, as much as it feels like, oh, they are on my side because I did all these good things, even if you treat them like absolute crap the whole time, it's always going to end the same way. Nerissa running in last minute to say that she heard the Crooked Man give the orders to Georgie to kill the girls. Now that she's free from the ribbon, she could finally speak up and say what she knows. And with that evidence, everybody agrees that the Crooked Man is guilty, and then you have a choice of how to take care of him. Since nobody can ever agree on anything, they all want to take care of him in different ways. Some people want to lock him up, some people want to throw him in the witching well, and essentially the choice ends up being Bigby, since he's the only actual elected official currently, since Crane is out now. From here, you can choose to rip his head off, throw him down the witching well, or just imprison him. I remember at first I thought they were going to do a cop-out, because right when you either make that choice or are still deciding to make that choice, the Crooked Man attacks Bigby. But luckily, once you beat him up and get him off you, you do actually get that choice. It's just kind of a little scare moment there for a second. If you choose to imprison him, essentially Auntie Greenleaf will turn him into a crow in a permanently locked cage. Otherwise, you either throw him down the witching well or murder him. And obviously, the different people of Fabletown will either agree with your decision or disagree with your decision, depending on what you picked. So if you choose to kill the Crooked Man before you ever even get there, you just bring his dead corpse back. And by the way, that death scene is pretty gruesome as crap. Oh my goodness. And everyone's not very happy about it. By the way, this is another one of those scenes where Prince Lawrence can be here and say stuff if he's still alive, which is kind of cool. Obviously him and some of the other people like Holly and Gren are more likely to agree with your choice. They are kind of like, yeah, I mean, he deserved to die. But everyone else is kind of horrified, especially Snow White, who told you to bring him back alive, has been trying to support and change you this whole time, and then you literally went and murdered him. This is kind of the moment where all of your decisions on what kind of Bigby you decide to be culminate. The crowd will be very against you or afraid and scared of you.
Bigby.
Don't!
They see you as kind of like a creature that needs to be controlled. So then instead of it being an argument of how do we handle the Crooked Man? Is he guilty? It's an argument of, can we still trust Bigby and Snow to run our government when they just straight up murdered this guy without a trial? Now, ultimately, choices in this don't matter again, just like in the other one, where no matter what happens, the crowd will get back on your side. Mainly because of Snow White. She single-handedly has gained the respect of all of them by just being a really good person. So they are like, okay, as long as Snow's there and she's gonna control Bigby, I guess I can agree to this. And that's literally the only reason they do it. They are afraid of you. So while this choice doesn't matter and they can't just straight up kick you out of government or have extreme consequences like that, all of your choices up to this point on what kind of person you decided to make Bigby and whether or not he was trying to change for the better or be a bad person, it does change everyone's outlook on you. They will either be terrified of you and think you're horrible, or they'll respect you and think, hey, maybe this is a good change for our government. Maybe he can turn things around. And that's a really cool thing. So our story ends with Snow and Bigby getting back to their normal jobs. Snow is much more busy now because she has way more responsibilities than she originally had, and so she hasn't really had time for Bigby, and he kind of feels awkward. You head outside, and there's essentially a truck that's going to take certain animals back to the farm. No matter what you do, Toad and TJ are going to get sent back. Snow White does it without asking you. And so they'll be mad about it, but if you say like, hey, I'm sorry, I tried to do what I could, they're at least a little nicer about it. But essentially Toad's really upset. Colin can also be in this truck, depending on whether or not you decided that he should go back to the farm. And what's kind of cool is Toad will bring it up and be like, why isn't Colin on this truck, if you chose for Colin to stay. TJ then asks you to give this little bug that was part of his collection to Snow White, and you actually have the choice to refuse him. The smallest smallest percentage of people refused him. And I got to be part of it in one of my playthroughs, and I felt horrible.
If you could bring it to her,
Look, I'm kinda busy here.
please.
Sorry, kid.
It was terrible. I didn't enjoy any moment of it. So the truck ends up leaving, and then you see that Nerissa's there kind of waiting to talk to you. You guys have a good little conversation, but then she says that she needs to tell you some things. Essentially to help the girls get out of the pudding and pie and finally be able to leave. Faith ended up stealing a picture of Crane and Lily together, but having dirt on one of the Crooked Man's allies put everybody at risk. There could be severe consequences. Nerissa was really scared of something happening if anybody found out that they had this picture of the Crooked Man doing something crazy to them, so she ended up going to Georgie and basically begging for mercy and hoping that Georgie would protect them from the Crooked Man. But that's when Georgie got the orders to kill them. And after that happened, Nerissa ended up leaving Faith's door at your doorstep. Essentially, it was the only way that she thought she could actually get your attention and get you investigating into this case. During that time, the system was in a really terrible spot and extremely corrupt, and there's been tons of examples of this given to you throughout the game. And if she had tried to go to the business office and get help, they probably would have been at the back of the line and never gotten to. So this way, you couldn't ignore it. And what's cool is in that first episode, when you had the option to do more investigation work, you could find that there was some blood leading to a fence where she must have clipped her leg, and there's like a little part of her jeans there. Jeans that she is now wearing in this current scene, which is kind of cool. So you know, you're like, hey, this was her jeans. They end up having like a really good little heart-to-heart moment where Bigby kind of talks about how he's struggling, trying to keep everybody in Fabletown happy. He feels like no matter what he does, everybody's just kind of against him, or there's always going to be someone that isn't happy, and that he doesn't even know where him and Snow stand right now. But Nerissa gives encouraging words, and she talks about the fact that you and Snow are going to change the system and make it way better, and that even if they don't want to admit it, Fabletown needs Bigby, and he is helping people, and that none of this would have happened if it weren't for him. And right as Nerissa is gonna leave, she says it. She says the line, she does it.
You're not as bad as everyone says you are.
And suddenly there's this huge realization moment. Tons of dialogue is flashing back in Bigby's mind, and he kind of puts it together, and then you can choose to go after her or let her go. Neither option makes any difference whatsoever because the episode ends there. But I assume the original plan was to have it make a difference in the sequel. But I doubt the sequel's gonna have any of the original plans. I really like this twist at the end, this whole realization moment, because it's not made obvious to the player. It doesn't say, hey, this is the twist, this is what happened. It just kind of puts all the puzzle pieces finally together and says, hey, there is something here, and then you have to actually put it together yourself. You have to use that big brain of yours. There's two major theories as to what this actually means, and there's really good videos on these theories that I'd recommend watching, but to kind of just give a brief explanation, the first one is that the entire time that you had met Faith in the first episode, that was actually Nerissa glamored as Faith. This was either because she was covering for her. This makes the most sense to me, seeing as she says the same thing that Nerissa said. And the evidence for this is obviously the fact that these prostitutes were using glamour to appear as other people in order to fulfill people's sex fantasies. So it makes sense that Nerissa would be able to glamour herself to look like Faith. Another piece of evidence that may or may not be evidence is the fact that the woodsman was upset and got mad at Faith because Faith didn't recognize him, which might just be him being egotistical and expecting everyone to know that he was the woodsman, the person who saved Little Red Riding Hood, or it could have been a mixture of that and the fact that Faith was supposed to know who he was, but Nerissa didn't. Essentially, the idea is that she did this as a way to connect with Bigby ahead of time so that he would have an emotional stake when she ends up leaving Faith's head at his door. This also makes the most sense to me because they compare a lot of the dialogue. Like, for instance, at the beginning, Faith says if Bigby likes her ribbon, And then Narissa does the exact same thing later on. So I do believe that that was what they were trying to go for. But other people have a different theory. This other theory is that Faith is actually alive and glamoring to look like Narissa. And that essentially Narissa's body had just been glamored to look like Faith so that Faith could get away. The main evidence behind this one is that obviously them acting like the same person still checks out. And then also there is this line of dialogue that apparently Dr. Swinehart needs to run a few more tests on the body because something is weird. Something's off with Faith's body. And it could be that the thing that was off is the fact that it wasn't actually Faith's body. It was Narissa's body glamored to look like Faith. So I do think that is a definitely solid theory, and it could very well be true. I still lean towards the fact that Narissa was glamored to look like Faith in the beginning, but both theories are really cool. The fact of the matter is that the game doesn't tell you. It doesn't say, hey, this is exactly what the twist is. It just puts all the puzzle pieces out there for you and says, hey, we just revealed the twist with that last line, and then kind of leaves you to form your own opinion on what actually happened with all the evidence that you've gotten throughout the episodes. It's cool. I really like it. I like the fact that they didn't just go, hey, this is the twist. They were like, hey, something just happened. Here's all the pieces. You come up with your own solution. And with that, we're finally through all 5 episodes of The Wolf Among Us. I left out some details here or there because I'm going to talk about that in the actual playthrough by playthrough section. So let's get into it. Okay, so now let's just talk about the playthroughs themselves. So the very first playthrough I did was good, and that's the one that I've probably seen the most. Every person I've watched play it kind of usually went towards the good side, which is maybe just because I have a good choice of friends and my family are good people. But yeah, none of the people I ever watched ended up really going down the bad route. I think the closest was my mom, because she sometimes started taking no shit anymore, and she was just like, fuck you, bro. But so the first playthrough was probably the most boring for me because it was like, this is mainly stuff I'd already seen before, but I tried to be as good as possible. And obviously, everybody is still like lukewarm towards you. The game kind of reiterates the fact that the shitty actions that Bigby has made in the homelands, as much as they're supposed to get this fresh start when they moved to New York and fled the homelands, it's like everyone still remembers what he did and they still don't completely trust him. So this whole kind of game, you're trying to regain that trust and you're trying to work with them, but at the same time, to a certain extent, you can't just nice your way through everything. And I think what's kind of extra interesting is the fact that Telltale doesn't really have it be like, you are Bigby, that Bigby has this same personality as you, but instead this game kind of goes down the route of you are making major choices for a character that exists. Bigby is a character. He's going to talk a certain way, he's going to act a certain way, he's going to have certain feelings. It's just ultimately what he decides to do that is your choice. So even when you are good, you can see his struggle with it. Sometimes he gets angry even when he's trying to be nice because he kind of just reaches his limit. He is a hot-headed guy. And so you can't just be Andrew like, oh, it's okay, buddy. Oh, and just transfer that to Bigby. Like, Bigby's going to be like, okay. Like, really trying to keep it under control. And I like that because Bigby is a really cool character. And if he just ended up basically being a front for the player in terms of, oh, this is just the player's personality put on a character, then I wouldn't like it as much. I like the fact that I'm basically just saying, Bigby, do the good thing, even though you're a hot-headed guy. Do what you want to do, which is become a better person. So for the good playthrough, most people will start treating you better or like respect certain things about you. They'll kind of like slowly come from, like, you're kind of punching uphill, honestly. It's an uphill battle. Everybody at first is kind of just treating you like crap. And if you kind of power through that and try to be good, then they'll slowly kind of change their mind. And especially during that ending scene, they'll be like, you know what? Bigby did do all these things that were good and kind of be on your side. And I think that's really cool. The bad playthrough is where I learned just how big of a difference your general actions and dialogue makes on the game. I expected that most of the major choices were going to have an impact on how people liked you or not, but I expected the dialogue to be extremely minor in comparison, and I was horribly wrong. If you treat people like shit in the game constantly like I did during the second playthrough, they get real pissed off. Like, they will remember the shitty things that you said earlier. I think what surprised me the most is Snow White tries so hard. She really wants you to be changed. And when you're doing like this bad Bigby playthrough, she constantly is like trying to defend you for other people, trying to be like, Bigby, come on, please just work with us, be nice, try to do this. She really wants you to change. She really wants you to be good. She sees that there is something inside you that means that you could be good if you chose to. And so I felt like absolute trash the entire playthrough. There are some great satisfying moments. Things like ripping Gren's arm off is so awesome, or when these people are just being frustrating and not working with you and being absolute jerks instead of just having to bite your tongue and try to be nice, just being able to fully be like, fuck you, punch him in the face, kick the door in. It's very satisfying. Destroying the entirety of the pudding pie was a satisfying experience that I never got to experience before. And so those moments were good. And ideally, you could probably say the best playthrough is the one where you're a nice guy, but then as soon as people start giving you too much shit, you just go ballistic kind of thing. And you can mix and match and still be good and just have a hard edge where if you push him too much, he'll punch you in the face. But in general, just doing everything bad kind of sucks, actually, because just I felt terrible sometimes when Snow was defending me for the 30th time, even though I really didn't deserve it, or making just everyone upset. And they definitely remember it, and they bring it back. The dialogue, drastically different. There was tons of dialogue I had never heard before, because when people are mad at you, their entire dialogue changes towards you. There were scenes that I never thought would have different dialogue. There would be really no realistic reason except that it is really cool and really makes it feel like your actions make a difference. And they did that, because there's a lot of times I look at this through the lens of, this was a low budget game. It was very time restricted. They made it on an episode by episode basis. They had a couple months to finish the next game, basically episode. They don't have time to make drastically different content depending on your changes most of the time. I think that's why episode 2 and 4 are so like down in comparison to 1, 3, and 5. It's because the time constraints meant that, hey, we can make this episode a little bit weaker with a little bit less good choices, but then we can make this next episode with this huge story beat much better. We can take extra time with that. That's what it felt like to me. I don't actually know, obviously. So I always looked at it through that lens. So I never really expected it to be the biggest changes in the world. So seeing that they took this time to make sure that your choice on whether or not you're being good or bad as Bigby actually feels drastically different and makes the characters treat you completely different is awesome. Hearing tons of dialogue of people just being like, fuck you, you shitty person, when I was doing the bad playthrough, and just seeing all of these changes was awesome. Being reminded of the things that I'd done before that were really bad was awesome. All this new dialogue definitely made it worth it for me. Obviously, there's certain things like being able to see Crane's apartment not destroyed for the first time and how much content was there that I had never seen before. Also really cool. Those were the moments where I was like, okay, this project is worth it. And I think the fact that there are some gruesome deaths that can happen if you're bad Bigby that I never got to see before, or just how drastically different that end scene is. It was really cool. So then the last playthrough I did, which I probably used the least amount of footage from, was a silent playthrough. If you don't know much about Telltale games, they always say that silence is a valid option. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a silent option where you just don't say anything, which I think is kind of a cool choice, because sometimes there are things where I didn't know what to say. And most of the time it'll pick that option by default if you don't pick anything in the time that you have. And I think that playthrough was easily the funniest. There are so many really funny moments where you just make people feel super awkward by not saying anything, or people get mad at you by not saying anything.
Bigby, hey, wait up. Have you seen my wife? Have you seen Beauty? Motherfucker.
There are so many clever ways that the writers managed to keep pushing the story forward despite you not saying things. I can't tell you how many times I would be interrogating someone and just say nothing, and then everyone looks real awkward, and then Snow White has to jump in and be like, did you do this? And like jump in for me. And then she would get pissed off when I did it so many times in a row and just be like, okay, you gotta start talking. So it was really interesting because there are some really clever ways that they wrote around the fact that you can choose to not talk a lot. Like, obviously there are scenes where there's dialogue Bigby says without giving you a choice. Like, it'll just happen because either it's needed to push the story forward, or in general, like, you being able to choose what to say would make zero difference. But for the most part, you can choose. There were several times where I was just silent for several minutes, and it was super interesting to see the results of that.
None of that, George, yeah. I'd rather just strike a macho pose for a moment.
Summarizing this whole project, I'm really glad I worked on it. There were definitely times where I debated on whether or not I wanted to continue, and there were definitely times where I was like, is this really worth it? But I am glad I went through with it in the end, and it took me forever. And if you pay attention to my channel at all, this is coming way after my last video essay I've ever made. I've spent months and months working on this one, just because I had to break it up in order to really do this video justice. Because as much as it was worth it for those moments, like seeing Crow's apartment before it was destroyed, all these new lines of dialogue I never heard before, scenes I never got to see before, those moments were awesome and totally worth doing these 3 playthroughs. And I was very excited to see new content in a game that I loved so much. It was also really hard because there is so much that you have to watch over and over again. I ended up basically just breaking it up into episodes and being like, today I'm going to do my good playthrough episode 1. Tomorrow I'll do my good playthrough episode 2. And then tons of school things came up. I had final exams. I had Halloween stuff come up. There was a lot that just got in the way. And there were times where I just knew I couldn't work on it today because I wouldn't be giving it my all and I wouldn't be giving it the respect that it deserves. So it's been a really long-term project that I've broken up a lot. And like I said, it ended up being worth it. And I'm really glad I got to experience it firsthand and see all these differences, because even you didn't get to see everything. I didn't want to include every single little thing, because there are a lot of subtle differences that were really cool to see. And I tried to go over the major ones, but getting to experience that firsthand was fun. Getting to see how different dialogue choices make such a difference was so cool. So I did really enjoy it. It just hurt when it was like explaining to me a mystery that I already knew the answer to for the 3rd time. Getting through that 3rd playthrough was definitely the hardest one, just because as much as there was some funny stuff every once in a while with the silent, there was still, oh boy, we're getting some backstory again. Hey, we're getting clues to a mystery I already know the answer to again. And I understand why I can't skip these, because this is a story-based game. The story is the center of the game, and it should be up front and not skippable. But it does kind of suck when you just played through the game twice and you're on your 3rd playthrough and you're like, all right, I already know all this so well, back my hand by this point. So it was hard sometimes, but in the end, it was really worth it. It was really exciting. It was a lot of work. I took a lot of notes, but I'm really glad I did it. And I'm sorry it took so long. I wish my life had been less busy. I wish I had a better schedule and work ethic at the time. The only reason it's getting out now is because I've very recently gotten a much better work ethic and schedule that lets me work on things like this that I've wanted to work on for a really long time, or get more of it done. The Wolf Among Us is a great game, and I love it to death. It reminds me of, I think the best comparison I can draw is when you watch a movie or maybe a movie series or a TV series where there's just such an interesting world that engrosses you so much, and you just kind of get addicted to it, and you just love being a part of this world. You love being a part of it. You love everything about it. And I got that similar feeling from that, where usually once that show ends or once that movie ends, you kind of feel a little bit empty because now you've lost your entrance into that world. You can go back and rewatch it and it'll still be good, but you've kind of lost all your new content, your new ability to dive into this world and enjoy it and just kind of take a break from the real world for a bit. And The Wolf Among Us gave me very similar feelings. I love its world. I love its characters. I loved its art style. I loved its music. Like, I wanted to keep playing as Bigby and see him continue to try to handle the fables. And it's just beating the game. It does kind of make like a little sad feeling for me. And I remember at the time I had no idea if they were ever going to make a sequel. And it was just really bittersweet to finally finish it. And doing this project has been really fun to get to dive back into that and get to explore every inch of it, see if there were any new things that I'd never seen before. And just being a part of that world again was really fun. And the game's not perfect. I definitely can't say that. It has a lot of jank. Telltale got a lot better later on when it comes to blending animations and animation quality. I think they also improved their engine a lot to better transition between things to have this better animation quality, because there's a lot of little jank bits. There are times playing this where I wish that they had used a different engine, or I wish they had had more development time to make it even more perfect, because I love this game, but even I am like, hey, this animation here is really jank and looks bad. Hey, this transition, this camera angle change looks really jank and bad. Like, there's a lot of age showing in their engine, even in The Wolf Among Us, and showing the limitations of what they had at the time. Hey, episodes 2 and 4 aren't as good as the other 3. I wish they had had more time to make each episode just as good as the last. Like, it's not a perfect game. And answering the question from the beginning of, do choices in this game actually make a huge impact, or is it kind of that fake choice that some of the later Telltale games had where it's such a minor thing it doesn't even matter? Well, yes and no. It depends on the choice. Like I said, especially ones like that big episode 3 choice, drastically different. You can miss out on things, see things that most people haven't seen before. That's cool. I think the fact that depending on how you act and all the dialogue drastically changes how everybody treats you. Really cool. Those are good, big differences. But then obviously there are quite a few where it's extremely minor, or it feels like it should be bigger than it actually is, but isn't. Does that ruin the game for me? No, because there's still enough there to make my choices feel worthwhile. There's still characters that'll bring up things that you said or did that they didn't like or did like, that makes it feel like my decision to choose to do that did make an impact. There are these big choices I make, like whether or not to kill the Crooked Man, that ultimately doesn't really make a humongous difference in terms of how the story ends, but feels impactful because every character treats you differently for that decision. Being able to have Prince Lawrence be dead or alive for the rest of the series based on where you chose to go first in episode 1, that's a cool thing. And obviously choices like the one in episode 4 that doesn't really make much of an impact at all, because you maybe get a little bit more information and ultimately you'll have to go to both places anyway because they, I guess, didn't have time to really create enough content to not use both of it. So there are some choices that are way more minor and way more lame than you might initially have thought, but there are a significant amount of choices that I didn't expect to make as big of a difference as it does, and there's some that are just really good, really solid choices. I feel like playing this game, you are creating your own Bigby, you are creating how Fabletown sees you. I feel like those are the biggest differences, and I think that alone makes your choices feel impactful. Like, even though you're gonna essentially complete this investigation, you're gonna figure everything out, you're gonna get the Crooked Man no matter what. Those are definitives. Like, there's no way to just fail to solve the mystery. There's no way to fail to get the Crooked Man. Those are things that are just going to happen. The big differences are, how do you do it? how does Fabletown see you for your actions? What kind of Bigby are you? And that is enough for me, because it's pretty cool to say, hey, I was a really good Bigby and I got everybody on my side, or hey, some people really hated me and I wasn't that great, or hey, I made everybody hate me. I did a ton of shitty things. So it's not Heavy Rain where you can literally have all your characters die and just never solve the mystery, but there are choices and they do feel impactful. And I think to say that this is one of those Telltale games where the choices ultimately don't matter would be really wrong, because there are drastic differences. It's just that ultimately you're still going to get through the biggest story beats, but your journey to get there and how people feel about you and how it ends are all going to be drastically different per playthrough and choices. So yeah, not bad. I think choices feel very worthwhile, and having been able to scope out every little thing about it, I think that's made it more clear to me how many differences there actually are, and made me feel like, yeah, okay, this is a good choice game. This game, like, really, seriously, I love it. And it has not gone down in quality, having played it a ton of times. All it's done is kind of shown me how much nuance and how much detail there actually is in my choices that I didn't even guess was there before. Like, this game had such an impact on me, and working on this project right before Halloween, because I've been working on this video since late September. Like, that was when I started recording for the very first playthrough, and getting to re-experience that and relive my love of The Wolf Among Us, I ended up dressing up as Bigby for Halloween when I got together with a couple friends who had also been being really safe during this quarantine and had the Halloween party. I dressed up as Bigby Wolf in his second form, where he's got the claws and the teeth and the super raggedy hair and the yellow eyes. I put in colored contacts for the first time, and it was super fun. I put so much attention to detail as I could into that costume, because I love that character so much. I love this world, and I always wanted to see where it could go further. And I enjoyed the Fable comics so far. I've gotten like the collection book of, I think, the first 10 volumes, and I read through all that and I enjoyed that. But it's not exactly the same, but it's an experience as The Wolf Among Us. It's a very different art style. I mean, I say very different, but it's a pretty different art style. The colors are very different, and it's a whole different vibe playing the game than it is the comics, as much as I do also enjoy the comics and want to read more of those. So now, let's talk about sequel. So after The Wolf Among Us came out, it was critically acclaimed and had a really vocal fan base that wanted more of it, but I don't think it did as well as, say, The Walking Dead, so they ended up kind of pushing aside sequel plans and kind of instead made sequels to The Walking Dead, tried and experimented with new IPs, and continued to make more and more games, slowly kind of going down in quality over and over. Some of these I actually did hear were pretty good. Like, I heard their Batman series actually was kind of underrated. I heard that the later Walking Dead seasons were kind of underrated, but I know a lot of people were just kind of turned off by how many different Telltale series were coming out, and the fact that a lot of them ended up not being super good and kind of feeling rushed and just pushed out the door, and were humongous step down from their older things like The Walking Dead Season 1 or The Wolf Among Us. There was still a ton of fan outcry for A Wolf Among Us Season 2 throughout this, and finally towards the end of Telltale, they announced that they were going to make A Wolf Among Us 2, and that was super exciting, especially since I just played The Wolf Among Us really late, and I was very happy to hear that. They later announced that they were going to make an entire new engine, and this was going to be the first game to make use of it, which was super exciting, since another major complaint with Telltale games at the time was the fact that they kept using this same old engine that was extremely buggy and hard to work with, apparently, over and over for all of their games. That is what was causing a ton of the jank and performance issues and the little weird lag spikes you would sometimes get. Like, the games could be so much less jank if they had moved engines earlier, so it was exciting to finally say, hey, we're gonna make a new engine. Wolf Among Us 2 is gonna be the first game to make use of that. Hopefully it's going to be a lot better. Everyone was really pumped for this. Like I said, The Wolf Among Us 1 isn't a perfect game, and I think a lot of that comes from the time constraints that they were under and the fact that they were using this engine. The fact that The Wolf Among Us, one of their earliest games, even has this jank from their crappy engine, and is one of the flaws that I see with the game is the fact that they did use that engine says a lot, and the fact that they were still using that years and years later is insanity. So it was super exciting. I was pumped. They did like a little tease with some of the voice actors, and I was really excited to see where it went. And then Telltale went under. They went bankrupt. It happened extremely suddenly. They laid off all of their employees without their employees even knowing this was coming at all. Like, they ended up just getting dropped. So then I think Telltale got sued, and it was a huge thing, an ordeal, and all the plans for The Wolf Among Us 2 just kind of dropped dead. They ended up finishing the final season of The Walking Dead, but that was it. Then they were done. And that was extremely depressing because I was so excited to finally get more content in this world, and that was really sad to hear that it was never coming. But then, at the Game Awards 2019, there was a really surprise announcement that The Wolf Among Us 2 was in active development again, that Telltale was back from the dead. They had been bought by another studio and revived. The trailer is super awesome, and it's not using Telltale's old jank engine. It looks super good and smooth. We get a little bit of hints towards the story and the fact that the two main voice actors of Snow White and Bigby are coming back. It was super exciting. They even got a little hint at the soundtrack. Going on the site, they had a little bit more information. They explained that they got the lead writer from the first game. They got the two main voice actors from the first game, and they got the composer from the first game, which are all things that are amazing because I love the soundtrack of the first game. Its music is amazing. I love the voice actors, and I loved the writing. Those were all great things, and hearing that that's coming back for the sequel instantly put any fears I had of it not being as good to rest. And then for a long time, we didn't get any more information on this sequel until very recently in the 2020 Game Awards. Telltale came out with a little response on Twitter, basically just saying that when they did announce that, they were starting pre-development. So they very much are still in development. It's still going to be a while. They'll show us stuff when they have stuff to show kind of thing, and that they're taking their time with this. But what was something super exciting they did reveal in this little post is the fact that they are working on all episodes at once, which was my other major issue with the first Wolf Among Us, is that because they'd made it episode by episode, and obviously they probably had like the major plot beats already written from the beginning, but you can see from the previews for the next episodes in the first game that they obviously did not develop all the episodes at once, other than the fact that there's just variable time between episodes because they needed certain more development time for certain episodes, or they needed to get some of these episodes out sooner. So hearing now that with The Wolf Among Us 2 they are actually making all the episodes at once, that's super good news to me, because I don't care if they decide to release it like weekly, do something kind of like Don't Nods Tell Me Why did, where they just came out with an episode every week. I would be completely fine with that, because each episode now I know is designed to its fullest extent. They don't have to be like, we don't have time to make this episode as good as we want to, so this one's just going to be a little more mediocre. Like, every episode is going to hopefully be up to snuff with the rest of them. Each one is going to be developed to its fullest extent because they are all being made at once. This is how they want it to be. It's not how much do we have time for. So I'm really excited for The Wolf Among Us 2. I'm excited for new engine. I'm excited for bringing back all of the best creatives and voice actors from the original. I'm really pumped to see what they can do with this, and without the rushed development, it's exciting. And I'm really pumped to see where this goes. The Wolf Among Us means a ton to me, and I'm really happy that I got to do this video, and I'm really happy that you stuck around to watch me talk about this game way too in depth for too long. Sorry it took me so long to make this. Have a good day. Tell me when you're ready. Was that the sound of you hitting it? Okay. This is how I dance.
doing great.
Thank you.